Hello everyone, my name is Zach and I'm an addict, and yeah, this is my first YouTube video. I've recently posted quite a few videos on TikTok and there's been an overwhelming response from, so many different people. People that are in addiction, people suffering from anxiety, depression, mental health issues, anybody who can relate to, the life that I've lived and, the difficulties that I've faced and the problems that I've had mentally, the problems that I've had with addiction, problems that I've had with trauma and abuse and my childhood in general. So I thought perhaps doing some YouTube videos might also be a good idea. So this is my first one, and the topic of this YouTube session is going to be anxiety. So anxiety is something that I did suffer with quite heavily. I wasn't aware that I did whilst I was using, because the drugs kind of mask really any real feelings that you actually have, so you can't really acknowledge what's going on inside at all. You're totally oblivious to what sort of feelings you have going on. That's the whole idea, because you don't want feelings. They're too painful to experience and bear. I really struggled with my emotions. I wasn't able to communicate feelings. I wasn't, that inability to communicate the way I felt led me to behave in different ways. I'd act out as a child. It would kind of, if I was sad, I would misbehave, and I would, as an adult even, I'd act out. If somebody hurt me, oh, I'll hurt you back. That was the kind of behavior that I had. And that was just because I couldn't communicate simply to that person, for example, you're really hurting my feelings. What you're doing is really hurting and I can't bear it anymore. Please, can you stop? Or I can't continue to be around you. Though that sort of conversation is something that was the moon to me. I couldn't communicate that. I didn't know how to. Mostly because I didn't know what I was feeling. I just acted. These thoughts weren't a process of mine. It wasn't within my armory for me to pick up and utilize those skills at the time, and through all of my adult life and through childhood as well. So moving on to the anxiety. So when I come out of treatment or rehab centre in London, which was over 13 months ago now. So I'm 13 months clean, over 400 days. And when I came out, I was hit with this wave of feelings, emotions, because obviously using drugs for so long completely buried everything. I hadn't felt a genuine emotion for God knows how long. And what happens when you get clean is that suddenly you get your feelings back, and it's terrifying. It is extremely terrifying and it's extremely painful. I remember crying for no reason. For example, just watching a video of Queen perform live and being so sad about not being able to watch Freddie Mercury live made me cry. So, I spent about 2 weeks that way, and it was extremely emotional and very difficult for me to get through, because, feelings are what we use on. Whenever we feel certain ways, happy feelings, sad feelings, especially feelings of pain, that's an excuse to use, because we don't like that, we can't manage that, it's unbearable, we don't know how to deal with those sorts of feelings at all. So obviously, getting all these feelings back, I realised that obviously throughout my addiction, I must have been suffering from anxiety, because this feeling of anxiety hit me like a ton of bricks. I was having 4 or 5 hour sessions of anxiety at a time, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like somebody was standing on my chest. My heart was in my stomach, and it felt like it was pounding so hard, and that made me feel sick, so I couldn't eat. It just felt so uncomfortable, and if you're in a work environment, for example, and this happens to you, what do? It's so difficult, trying to communicate that with your employer, for example. But I found that honesty is extremely key to recovery. It is probably the number one rule, is to get honest, about yourself, your life, what you've done, everything you've done wrong in your addiction, everything that's happened to you. So I maintain my honesty with my employer and my business partners, should I say, and yeah, it was much easier that way, because when I had these feelings and I needed to walk out of the office to get away, I did. But how did I overcome it? And how have I got to a place now where I rarely struggle with feelings of anxiety? is a longer process. Probably took about 6 months for this to get to a point where I wasn't really having problems with it anymore. But initially it started with just phoning someone every single time I felt anxious. Talk about what was going on for me at the time, why I felt anxious, where is it coming from. And obviously I took suggestions from the people that I called, and you say, and probably going to ask, who do you call? So I'm part of a program called Narcotics Anonymous, and within that program you get a sponsor, but everybody in the meeting that you go to will be willing to be there for you and support you and help you, which is what's so incredible about NA. So I called this person, and this person ended up becoming my sponsor. But his advice was to get out, go for a walk, go for a run, go for a jog, or physical activity of some sort, just to take yourself out of the space that you're in. And that helped, and it worked. And eventually I'd have to walk for quite a long time until it eventually went. But my thought process was, this isn't fixing the problem. This isn't getting to the root cause. This isn't understanding where it comes from. This is just a physical exercise to reduce the physical symptoms that anxiety brings on. It's not really tackling any of the issues that I have in my mind about what's creating the anxiety. So where do we start with that? So for me, what happened was I needed to know why I was feeling anxious. So I noted down, when it was happening, where, who I was with, who those people were, who potentially they reminded me of, what type of person they were, what was their attitudes, what sort of behaviours trigger it, noting all this down, becoming extremely aware about what it was that made me feel anxious. In addition to that, discussed it with a therapist. I have a therapist still now, even 13 months clean, every 2 weeks. It's so important, I feel, for any person, addict or not. It's incredibly healthy to have a therapist. And I think that in this country we're so far behind in terms of where we need to be at by comparison to America, for example, where therapists are brought in at a young age, which I think is incredible, because we get taught to communicate feelings at a young age, which I teach to my son now. But yeah, so I discussed it with my therapist, where it all came from, what's happened every time I was feeling anxious. So what I started to identify was patterns. I started to look at the similarities between each occasion of which I felt anxious. So for me, what I noticed was it kept happening most intensely when I was alone. So there was something about me being on my own that I didn't like, that scared me, made me feel fearful. But then I got a little bit deeper with it and worked out it wasn't always just being alone. It happened to be after spending long periods of time with people. So for example, my son, and he was here for the whole weekend, which he spends every other weekend here, and 50% of the week as well. So I have him 50% of the time. But when the weekend came and he was here for longer than just the odd day in the week, when he left, the anxiety was severe. It was very strong and it was very painful. So it was a case of having someone there for a long period of time and then them going. So then I obviously took that information with my therapist, and we worked back throughout my life and tried to identify any scenarios where being alone or being left has left me feeling afraid or scared. So I worked all the way back to my childhood and remembered experiences of feeling alone and scared, and when people had left me alone, or why would I have been scared when I was alone. And what I came up with was that whenever I was alone as a child, it normally meant that something bad was going to happen very soon, which is sad to talk about, but it's the truth. If I was on my own at home and it was quiet and I was, playing my games or whatever, probably N64 at that age, and it meant that my father would be home at some point soon, and that meant that something bad was going to happen, violence and the house being smashed up, and all these traumatic events, my mother being hurt very badly by my father, some horrible things that I had to see. So you know, that anticipation of that person coming into my world was fear. You know, it was a feeling of fear and pain and sadness. So, you know, that was one thing that I identified. And the other one I identified was my mother was very suicidal, and sometimes she would be in hospital. I know I had to call ambulances as a child to come and save her from overdosing because she was passed out on the floor. So I had to be, I guess, taken away for a period of time where there wasn't no physical adult, or I was waiting with paramedics until my father got back, and you know, seeing my mother in that stage, and you know, although there wasn't anybody, my parents weren't there, but there was people there, paramedics and whoever else, but that was a feeling of my mother leaving me. You know, she wasn't coming back, so she's gonna go in that ambulance. Is she going to come back? What if she doesn't come back and save me, rescue me, look after me? Because I need her. So, yeah, what I realised was that there was nothing in this present moment today as an adult when I was feeling anxious about my son leaving me, or whether it was my best friend being here for the weekend, because we often spend a lot of time together, you know, and when he left, feeling very anxious about it, you know, and you know, whoever it was, you know, I'd always feel anxious once they'd left. And what did I have to feel anxious about? I didn't. There was no truth behind the feeling that I was experiencing. And so therefore it had to be linked to these traumatic events that I had growing up. Once I got this realization that, you know, there was nothing wrong, you know, there was nothing for me to be afraid of, and also the awareness that it's something that I'm experiencing from so many years ago that is still within me that I haven't been able to process and let go yet. So having just that knowledge and that awareness made it possible for me to tell myself every time I got anxious again that this is just a feeling. Firstly, this feeling cannot hurt me. It's not going to hurt me at all. You know, I'm not going to be in pain because of this. You know, as much as it feels very uncomfortable, I'm not going to be really, really hurt physically. I feel very, you know, uneasy and overwhelmed with this weird sensation that is anxiety. You know, it's just uncomfortable. That's all. You know, and it will end. I know it will end. You know, it's always to say out loud, it's just a feeling. It can't hurt you, and it will end. You know, I had to say these things out loud again and again. And also, you know, remind myself that it's not real. This wasn't real for me. This wasn't a genuine fear that was related to what was actually going on in the present moment. There was no reason for me to be scared that, you know, my friend was leaving. There was no reason for me to be scared when Archie was leaving, because he'd be coming back in a few days. So it didn't make any sense. So obviously that awareness and that understanding over time, practicing the same thing again and again, saying those things out loud, it's not real, it can't hurt me, it's just a feeling, and it's going to end. It's going to end, and I'm going to feel okay again soon. And that was the real key. And after I got to that place of understanding, then practicing that process again and again every time I got anxious, the time periods of which the anxiety attacks lasted were very short. You know, very, very, very short. It went from 4 hours to 3 to 2 to 1 to a few minutes, and then to not happening really at all. Last time I had an anxiety attack, it lasted about 10 minutes, and the thing about that attack was there was genuine reason for me to feel anxious. You know, I was not comfortable with a new relationship that I had, and I felt forced to go back to see this person, and I didn't want to, and I was not worried about having to have the conversation with them and say that I didn't want to come back. Yeah, felt very pressured, and you know, that's a real present experience that, you know, feeling anxious about is actually kind of normal. You know, that's a normal reason for somebody to get a little bit anxious. So that was okay, but I've not had any any feelings of anxiety that I don't feel had justifiable cause within me. So that's my experience with anxiety. And now, you know, I don't get it anymore, really. Like I said, that last experience was in the last 6 months. That's the only time I've had it. And, you know, I've got so much better at being alone. And don't get me wrong, I still probably don't enjoy being alone. But I don't get feelings of anxiety anymore. And that's, you know, an incredible feeling. And what can happen for a lot of addicts is that when they get to this place in the early stages, 2 to 3 months, these feelings can be incredibly overwhelming and push a lot of people back into using, because, you know, it is very intense at the beginning. It really is. But there is 100% a way out of it. And, you know, and it does get easier, it does get better, and, you know, a lot more manageable. But there's work involved, you know. These things aren't just going to figure themselves out. We have to look at them. We have to be prepared to look inside, you know. Recovery and, you know, fixing yourself and becoming the person you want to be, I feel, is not an outwards job. You know, it's not about changing environments, you know, changing this person in your life or changing that person. It's an inwards job. You know, you've got to look at yourself. You've got to be constantly aware of what's going on and be prepared to make change and be prepared to do some real work, you know. Pay attention to thoughts and feelings and to communicate them to another person. Biggest aspect of, you know, change is communication to somebody else about, you know, irrational thoughts that you may have. So yeah, it's an amazing process once you get to the end of it. But I obviously, I know from experience it is painful. It's so hard in those first 3-6 months, but beyond that, it gets a lot easier. And I still have days of feeling not great, but I don't have cravings anymore. You know, I don't crave using. I don't crave taking drugs. I don't crave having a drink. You know, I'll always miss being able to go and sit in a pub garden and have a nice beer and a cigarette. But you know, it's not an urge in it, or it's not like a go-to fix for me for feelings of pain or sadness anymore. Like that day's been and gone, and you know, I can't express how truly incredible it feels to be able to get to that stage and feel really, really confident in myself that I'd never use a drug again. You know, the life that I have today is far, far greater than I could have possibly imagined. And, you know, it did take a lot of work, I have to admit. You know, rehab is incredibly difficult, therapy is incredibly difficult. Dealing with feelings and learning about yourself, trying to figure out who you are, you know, it's a long process, but it can be done. You know, we just have to find that strength. And I always say, if we put as much effort into our using as we into our recovery, then you'll have no problem in staying clean. So, well, that brings me to the end of my first YouTube video, and I hope it's been helpful to at least just one person. So thank you so much for tuning in, and please subscribe here for more of my videos that are going to be coming up soon. Thanks.